Well, I think Sheldon's earned it. We believe in Sheldon, obviously, in making this decision. And so we're still optimistic that we're going to get it back on track.
The Sheldon Keefe era is set to begin. He is the new head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs, the former head coach of the Toronto Marlies, where Justin Bourne was employed for a couple seasons as video coach, working hand in hand with the new Leafs head coach. So who better to bring in to help learn a little bit more about the new guy than Justin? Justin, seemingly in our conversations, one thing that tends to come up is Sheldon's willingness to want to know more. He always seems to want to ingest information. Is that something that makes him a little bit more unique?
Yeah, I think about analytics departments in the NHL today and what they really are. And unless the head coach actually cares what the analytics department has to say, they're not really that valuable.
Yeah.
Sheldon was a guy who, when I was there, we'd constantly have a lot of questions about, whether it be how often a defenseman, retrieves a puck and breaks it out with success, or whatever the question may be. He'd want to know, but it was like we had one guy. We did have access to the Leafs analytics department if there were a real pressing question, but there were regular times where he'd be like, this is something we want to know that we just don't have the manpower, the time, the resources to find out. And now with an analytics department, an NHL staff at his beck and call, I imagine they're going to be very busy. He's really someone who just considers information. And a lot of times, if he does have a request about that information and it comes in and he sees all that data and it may mean nothing to him.
Right.
It's not necessarily going to change the way he thinks. He just wants to know as much as possible. And I think, the Leafs have a huge analytics department. He has questions. I think he's going to get more questions answered than any coach has so far with the Leafs department and as much as any coach around the league, I would imagine.
You listened to Brendan Shanahan speak initially after Mike Babcock was fired. He mentioned something specific. He said there was a lack of attention to detail on the ice with our playing style. When I spoke to you minutes after the firing and the Sheldon Keefe hiring, you mentioned one of Keefe's strengths is his attention to detail, almost fully countering what Brendan Shanahan said about one of the shortcomings of Mike Babcock.
Yeah.
When you say attention to detail, what do you mean by that?
I mean, like down to the very finest detail. His biggest thing is just that when you present something to the players, the way that you present that image, like a graphic, it has to be perfect. If there's any sort of flaw in it, if there's a misspelling, a typo, it just language that would stand out. He thinks that's embarrassing for the coaching staff. We're supposed to be prepared. We're supposed to be able to, bring them the information in a professional manner. And in turn, that's what his expectation is for the players. When they have routes they're supposed to execute on the ice, we expected them to be just as perfect as our presentation was to them. So those sort of details, I believe, just reflect to the player that this is what we're after, this is our expectation, and that's certainly something that he takes a lot of pride in.
So, with curiosity, with attention to detail, there might be a tendency to be a little bit different in the way things are on the ice. And a word you used when talking about this was creativity. He's someone that likes to be a little creative. Explain that a little bit more.
Well, I guess the biggest thing for me is just the way with practices, if there was something that he wanted to do differently with the team, he didn't necessarily just say, okay, I want to improve our neutral zone forecheck, so let me go into my book of neutral zone forecheck drills. He would go into his office with the whiteboard and with the staff and say, how can we recreate this scenario in a way that, it's just like a game, and then try different things during that practice. And how does it look when we do this, and just do it differently than it's always been done. And that's a major strength, and I think is uncommon in the hockey circle. So it certainly makes him a more creative, more flexible coach.
So we're talking about a lot of the quote unquote positives that he may be bringing and that make him successful as a coach and would maybe make him successful as a Maple Leafs coach. What are some of the shortcomings from your experiences with him, or even watching him behind the bench for the last couple seasons?
I think the biggest thing, he's just been sheltered. He's been in Pembroke for quite a while, and then Sault Ste. Marie, and you can imagine what the media demands are like there. It's not like it is here with the Toronto Maple Leafs. So with the Toronto Marlies, you think it's Toronto, so the hockey media is going to be everywhere, but really he hasn't had the same demands that he's going to have anywhere in the NHL. And now that he's with the Toronto Maple Leafs, I mean, that's a different animal entirely. So that could be a challenge for him, is just getting used to not just coaching at the NHL level, but living within a media market that's as frenzied, the demands that come with it. Like, you kind of have to be a public speaker if you're the head coach of the Maple Leafs. You're going to events all the time. So I think that's something that he'll have to work on, is not just coaching a team, but figuring out everything else that comes with that.
Yeah, there's coaching, and then of course coaching the Toronto Maple Leafs as well. He is notoriously, at least seemingly, a very private person. And again, in this market, you can't be very private. Do you think that will affect him performance-wise or personality-wise when it comes to coaching?
Well, the one thing they have here is you have an endless supply of resources, so he should be able to have other people take some of that off his plate if it's stuff that makes him feel uncomfortable. I know they're going to give him a list of demands from the PR department, and he's the head coach of the team. If he says, listen, this affects my ability to coach, maybe he'll turn down things that Babcock hasn't been turning down. So it will be interesting to see how much he takes on the early going. I would imagine there'll be some effort from the team to shelter him from that in the early going.
If things don't start off very well in the Sheldon Keefe era. Again, remember, the Leafs are on the road. They have 4 more games on this road trip. Teams don't notoriously practice during a road trip. Do you think he gets affected by the negative pressure that comes with being in this market, or the negative headlines that'll be written about his start if things don't go very well at the beginning?
I think he'll be pretty good at turning off everything else. I know, as the heat has been on them in the past, he's been able to turn off social media accounts and not pay attention to things. And he's someone that I think is able to separate himself from the noise. And that's going to be important here, particularly when things are going poorly. And it could be a rough start. No Mitch Marner, new team, lot to learn. So we'll see if he's able to pull himself away.
A lot to learn, but certainly familiarity with a lot of the players as well. How much does that help, I guess, easing into that role?
It makes a big difference.
Yeah.
A lot of these guys, 13 players on the current Leafs roster, are familiar with Sheldon, have played for him before, and even the other guys know him from summer training camps and all that. So it's a nice leg up. They know what to expect. He's not coming in blind and teaching something wildly new, so that should enable him to have success as early as possible.
And his first chance at that success comes against the Arizona Coyotes. 39-year-old Sheldon Keefe. The era, it starts tonight.